Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. Former President Trump filed a defamation lawsuit against CNN. He claimed that CNN has made a persistent association between Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler. Seth Meyers said, yeah, come on, CNN. Can a guy hold a series of racist rallies in a country suffering skyrocketing inflation without being compared to Hitler? James Corden added, but this is tricky territory for Trump. On the one hand, he thinks that CNN calling him racist hurt his chances for re-election. On the other hand, if he says he isn't racist, that could also hurt his chances for re-election. Quick podcast mention, Louis C.K. is the guest on Tim Dillon's podcast. I listened to that while running 8 miles this morning, humble brag, huh? It's pretty entertaining. Louis C.K. played the UK, specifically Wembley Arena, huh? Pretty impressive. The Guardian gave it 3 stars out of 5. Their headline, Louis C.K. review, sordid, cynical, and queasy comedy. The Guardian writes, aside from his intro, which announces the disgraced, disgusting Louis C.K., his transgressions go unmentioned. And yet, they're the palpable ghost at the feast of his jokes about dating or his taste in pornography, both of which routines practically beg for C.K. to acknowledge what we're all thinking. He doesn't. We must content ourselves instead with gags about the appropriateness of CK age 55 dating younger women and about, quote, fat porn. If you're looking for high-mindedness, you won't get it here. The comedy's ventured in the style of a man ruminating aloud on morality, religion, and sex, but the thought experiments seem less to reflect CK's sincere curiosity and more just a beeline towards sordid or ethically queasy terrain, as when he mimes kicking a 3-year-old to death or imagines an abortion law requiring people to eat their aborted fetuses. Wow, none of that sounds too much fun. The Guardian says, that's not to deny that queasy can be very funny, certainly in the hands of a stand-up with CK's easy authority. See the routine marveling that Auschwitz now has a Twitter account, but it also feels like CK is just leapfrogging from one callous construct to another, from cannibalism to murder to child abuse, seldom lingering long enough to develop his thinking or his humor beyond casual misanthropy, in which context the most memorable moments are the least grim, such as the section that finds CK leafing through his Bible to alight on a sparkling set piece about Jesus cursing a fig tree. It's one of several thrilling flashes of what audiences once loved about CK, but you got to cut through the cynicism to get them. Chortle saw the same show. They gave it 2.5 stars out of 5. They also picked up on Louis not making any direct references to a scandal and wrote, some lines that might otherwise be innocuous now have an unspoken context, such as when he mulls whether he'd have the moral backbone to be on the right side of history had he lived in the past. He's talking about slavery, but his hopes that he has the right ethical compass seem hard to stand up. He's still a fine technician, but no longer does his material shine a light on a lot of the schlubby bloke muddling through life with an uncommonly bleak undertow. Instead, much of his set at Wembley's OVO Arena seems like a cynical race to the bottom. A succession of bad taste ideas raised solely for their shock value, not because he can engineer a comically twisted logic to justify them. He considers eating babies, describes the fat porn videos he's seen online, talks about diarrhea, abortion, pedophilia, mimes, kicking a child to death. There's the, quote, comedy Japanese accent, or the bit where he says racist things before rescuing them with the second half of the interrupted sentence. This sounds like some show, doesn't it? They also spotlighted some of the better parts that the first review did, but added, these oases are not enough to overcome the feeling that CK has lost his luster, and not just reputationally. After a sold-out gig at the 4,000-capacity Hammersmith Apollo, there are plenty of seats left at Wembley, even with the upper layers curtained off. The encore has him reading subpar new material from his notebook, which seems an insult to people who paid more than £50 to see him. Wow. Not too long ago, Louis C.K. was being called the next George Carlin. Always a reminder, especially in sports, let people play, the vast majority of their career before we start comparing anybody to anybody in the Hall of Fame. Jim Gaffigan announced a new tour. That pause and disgust you heard in my pause. He called it the Dark Pale Tour. Okay, so you're not the most tan fellow. Like, how many Pale Tour jokes are we going to make? Stop. Call it something else, Jim. He'll tour the U.S. on the Dark Pale Tour in 2023. Now, this press release type thing I saw, boy, let's just dive in on this because I love just eye-rolling these things. Jim Gaffigan is a 6-time Grammy-nominated comedian, actor, writer, producer, 2 times New York Times bestselling author, 3-time Emmy-winning top touring performer, and multi-platinum selling recording artist. He's known around the world for his unique brand of humor, which largely revolves around observations on life. A top 10 comedian, according to Forbes' 2019 comedy list, Jim released his 8th stand-up special, The Pale Tourist, on Amazon. Up next, Gaffigan will be seen as the lead in the sci-fi dramedy Linoleum, and will star as Mr. Smee in Disney's Peter Pan and Wendy, opposite Jude Law. He will also co-star alongside Jerry Seinfeld, Melissa McCarthy, James Marsden, and Hugh Grant in Netflix's Unfrosted, and co-stars in the independent film Susie Searches, which premiered at the TIFF Festival this year. HBO Max recently announced Gaffigan joined the cast of Full Circle, a limited series from Steve Soderbergh and Ed Solomon, which follows an investigation into a botched kidnapping. Gaffigan was also recently heard in Disney/Pixar's film Luca. On the silver screen, his many credits include Three Kings, Super Troopers 1 and 2, and Chappaquiddick. Gaffigan also had 2 films recently in which he debuted as the lead, the comedic film Being Frank and American Dreamer. Dark thriller, which features Jim as a rideshare driver who moonlights as a private driver for a drug dealer. That happened? Yeah? I remember Being Frank. American Dreamer happened? Oh, and there's more. Gaffigan can also currently be seen opposite Ethan Hawke in IFC Films' Tesla. In addition to 2 seasons of the critically acclaimed semi-autobiographical The Jim Gaffigan Show, that happened. You forgot that happened. That happened. Gaffigan has guest starred in many TV comedies and dramas, ranging from Portlandia and Bob's Burgers. Yeah? 2 questions. Have you ever seen Bob's Burgers? The answer is no. Have you ever met anyone who has seen Bob's Burgers? No. But Jim Gaffigan says he's on it. You know who else was on it? Me. I'm in 5 episodes. Prove me wrong. Jim Gaffigan was also on the HBO cult hit Flight of the Conchords. How far back on the resume are we going to go? I was an intern at USA Network in like 1990. I don't talk about it. Gaffigan regularly does humorous commentaries on CBS Sunday Morning, for which he's won 3 Emmys. In 2018, Jim served as master of ceremony at the Al Smith Memorial Dinner. How deep are we going to go on the resume here, Jim? And don't forget, in 2015, Gaffigan had the great honor of performing for Pope Francis and over 1 million festival attendees at the Festival of Families in Philadelphia. The 2023 Dark Pale Tour. Tickets on sale Friday, 10 a.m., jimandgaffigan.com. Some of the locations: Norfolk, Richmond, Baltimore, Durham, Melbourne, Florida, Tampa, Florida, Grand Rapids, and Jacksonville. Holy cow, I went long there. Well, I got a lot to tell you about today. Sebastian Maniscalco is getting a sitcom. Originally, I was like, is that the best use of Sebastian Maniscalco? And then I was like, maybe it is. HBO Max has given an 8-episode straight-to-series order to How to Be a Bookie. In How to Be a Bookie, a veteran bookie played by, that's right, you guessed correctly, Sebastian Maniscalco, struggles to survive the impending legalization of sports gambling, increasingly unstable clients, family, coworkers, and a lifestyle that bounces him around every corner of Los Angeles, high and low. Sebastian said, "It's an incredible honor to be working with someone of Chuck Lorre's pedigree. They've put together a truly remarkable script, and now to be in the family with Warner Brothers Television and HBO Max, we're putting out some of the most compelling stories on TV and streaming. I just couldn't be more excited." Mike O'Malley's family comedy, that's the one that I think is what Reboot is making fun of. Untitled series follows Jim and Julia, who after an amicable divorce decide to continue to raise their kids at the family home. Isn't that Reboot? While taking turns on who gets to stay with them. Navigating the waters of divorce and child sharing gets more complicated for Jim when the owner of his favorite sports team enters the picture and wins Julia's heart. Isn't that Reboot, except Keegan's character would own a basketball team? John Cryer, Donald Faison, and Abigail Spencer star in Untitled series. And Frasier is back, baby. Kelsey Grammer will reprise the role of Frasier, first played on Cheers 38 years ago, but now he'll be surrounded by a new cast of characters. 10 episodes. Unfortunately, it's on Paramount Plus, the guys that are ruining Star Trek. In a recent interview, Kelsey Grammer said, Frasier, who moved from Boston to Seattle for the original series, will end up in another new place. He thinks he's going to go off and do one thing, and sure enough, his life takes him in another direction, and he ends up rich beyond his dreams.
Hey, this is Scott, and I have a podcast called Stand Up Comedy, Your Host and MC. It's a celebration of 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets by the famous and not so famous. All taped live on my comedy stages. The interviews will be with professional comics, showbiz agents and managers, and friends from the world of comedy. And the comedy sets are by comics like Dana Carvey, Jay Leno, Jerry Seinfeld, Bob Saget, Paula Poundstone, Willie Tyler and Lester, and many, many more. So click on the link and check out Stand Up Comedy, Your Host and MC, the single best podcast for stand-up comedy.
And today's Daily Comedy News is brought to you by Stand Up Comedy, your host and MC. You just heard Scott tell you about it. Got a little note from Scott. He said he owned and operated a chain of comedy clubs from 1980 to 2001, and from 2001 to the current day, he's produced dozens of comedy fundraisers in Northern California. Check out scottscomedystuff.com if you want to find out more about Scott, and check out Your Host and MC wherever you get your shows. Big highfalutin article in The Hollywood Reporter under the headline, As Trevor Noah Exits, Comedy Central Finds Itself in Crisis Mode. The Hollywood Reporter writes, to many in Hollywood, Trevor Noah's departure was the latest reminder that Comedy Central is no longer the comedy force it once was. In fact, plenty argue that the brand, formerly home to seminal hits like Key and Peele, Inside Amy Schumer, and Broad City, has been so dismantled it's barely in the comedy business at all. A prominent comedy producer says, Comedy Central never even comes up anymore. It's like no one takes pitches to them. A perhaps different comedy producer said, there's more DNA of Comedy Central on HBO Max than on Paramount Plus, which is crazy. The Hollywood Reporter writes, depending on who in town you ask, new boss Chris McCarthy is either, quote, a smart, thoughtful, straight shooter, unquote, who's executing a strategy that's necessary in an increasingly challenged entertainment environment, or an, quote, aloof bean counter, unquote, more interested in squeezing margins and pumping out press releases than in cultivating talent or hit shows. At one of his first all-hands meetings at Comedy Central, McCarthy allegedly was asked what his favorite show was, and according to one employee present, he said he liked watching CNN. The source says he couldn't think of one TV show. That same article mentions on September 30th, the day after announcing his exit, Trevor Noah was in Toronto filming his next hour of comedy. Well, we knew he was doing the comedy festival, but what we didn't know, I don't think, is it's a special that's going to air on Netflix. Interesting. And the Hollywood Reporter points out that the special will be on Netflix, not Comedy Central. And speaking of specials, so many, I can't even remember what I haven't watched yet. I didn't watch Hassan Minhaj. I didn't watch Nick Kroll. I didn't watch TJ Miller. I didn't watch the one I'm going to tell you about on the weekend. Maybe I pre-recorded Sunday. Who knows? Well, there's another new special. Matt Bronger. He's pretty funny. He's got a new special. It'll be released via 800-Pound Gorilla today, 9 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time on Moment. The special is called Doug. In Doug, Matt Bronger discusses his new relationship with fatherhood, appreciation for hot dudes, driving cross-country with his family during the pandemic, and much more. Patton Oswalt put out a statement for some reason. Patton Oswalt says, a new Matt Bronger special means you can look forward to a delightful one-hour reprieve from our current awful reality. Bronger is a joy and absurdly personified, and that's just his beard. Matt was going to record a new hour in 2020, but then there was this pandemic. Did you hear about this? Oh my God, we all had to sit at home for 2 years. Google COVID-19. It'll blow your mind. Matt Bronger said, luckily, my job went away just in time for me to be a stay-at-home dad, which I did for a year. During that time, stage comedy came back, and I threw away much of that original hour for what we have now, which is Doug. And that's your comedy news for today. Follow the show for free on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you get your shows. See you tomorrow.